there, I'm Miss Laura with the Wichita Falls Arts Council, and today we're going to do a pixelated shape project. So this is an example of something I've been working on over a few class periods. If you notice, all of the shapes are seemingly made up of these tiny squares that are all the same size. So there are no curved lines that I'm cutting, and some of them even fit together, and I've just been putting them together kind of like a puzzle by cutting randomly using graph paper. So we'll be using 1/4-inch graph paper today, meaning all of these little tiny squares are 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. We use 1 or 2 pieces to help us make our shapes. We'll need a full sheet of construction paper to glue all of our shapes down to, and then either 4 half sheets of different colored construction paper. And I'm also using bits of scrap from my scrap bin for smaller shapes because I have a ton of it. So I'm going to show you a few methods for making these shapes, 3 specific ones, and it all starts with my graph paper. So I like to start in the corner of my graph paper. That way, when I'm done making a shape, it gives me room to make more shapes. So we can start drawing a shape. I'm going to do some random shapes. If you want to make your shapes look like something, like maybe they're in the shape of a star, a heart, or a hot dog, you can do that. You can make your shapes look like something, but I'm going to go abstract. So the first method of drawing a shape is to use our grid or our graph paper blocks and just sort of outline which blocks we want to cut out. By following the lines of the graph paper, I'll just do a little shape to start. Okay, so these are just blocks in a random shape, and I've sort of followed all of the little blue lines of my graph paper, just going on the outside of them to outline a shape. Alternatively, we could draw a shape with curved lines, so maybe something like that. And then when I'm getting ready to cut out, I'm going to make sure I cut only on these blue lines around the shape that I've drawn, and just using my pencil line as a loose guide, but only cutting out full squares at a time. So I don't want to make these all graph paper colored, so I need to cut these out and then glue them to construction paper, and this will give me these different colored shapes. So I'm not going to cut on the line because I'm gluing this to something and I'm recutting these shapes out again. So I am just going to cut around my shapes. And this is pretty quick too, so we don't have to labor over cutting these things out perfectly because we're going to have to cut them again. When my shapes are roughly cut out, I'm going to grab my glue stick and one of my half sheets of construction paper. I'm going to glue on the underside, right? Because I want my pencil line to show, because I'm using it as a guide. I don't want to glue it face down. Glue. I'm going to glue it into the corner of my construction paper for the same reason that I drew in the corner of my graph paper. I want to leave this big mass for other shapes. I'll glue this one to a different color. And now that I have my shapes glued down, I can start to cut them out. Making sure that I'm only cutting on these little blue graph paper lines. I'm not cutting on my pencil line, that's just there to serve as a guide. I'm only cutting on blue lines, and this goes for the shape we drew, like this one, where we just sort of outlined near the graph paper, or even the more organic shape with all of the curved lines. We're still only cutting on blue lines to achieve our colored cutout pixelated shape. And I'm turning my paper as I'm cutting. Okay, so now I have one finished shape. I'm going to cut out my next shape, which is the more organic shape. The first thing I'm going to do is separate it from this massive paper. It'll be easier for me to handle. And I'm going to go around, and I'm only going to cut out complete squares. So my scissors are only cutting on these blue lines. So that means I'll be cutting into my pencil shape. Maybe even going a little outside my pencil shape on some squares. And so every little square that has pencil in it, I'm kind of making a decision whether or not that square deserves to stay or it needs to get lopped off. So like these two squares, the pencil line is barely in the squares, so maybe I can just cut those squares off. So it's okay to cut into your shape. Or if I look at the pencil line in these two squares, they're taking up most of the square, so those ones get to stay. Okay, good enough. And then the third option is one where you don't draw at all. I have my, oh, here we go. So here's a piece of construction paper that I just glued a section of graph paper to. And this one, I'm just going to cut randomly without an outline. So start over here and just take off some squares. I'll take off this whole section. Maybe I'll even just start by cutting off a section. And then cut into it. It's nice to save little scraps like these too, because then I can fit them into my bigger piece when I need a little piece to go in between pieces that don't fit perfectly together. Okay, so I have 3 cut pieces now. So I can start arranging them onto my paper and then just cut out more, maybe some that are a little bit larger, some that are smaller, and just sort of see how they fit together. If you want to create a picture that looks like something, like maybe it's a scene from a video game or a really elaborate hamster cage, that's all up to you. As long as we're only cutting on the blue lines of our graph paper after they're glued to construction paper shapes or construction paper colors. I think I'm actually going to take these shapes and glue them onto the one I started. I'm just seeing where they fit in. That's nice. Here I could bring in these little scraps that I made from cutting out my other shapes. And there's just like 2 little squares. I can find a place that, oh, that's a space for 2 squares. And I can either fill up this whole paper or leave some spots bare. Either is okay. Perfect. Okay, and we're making sure that we're gluing graph paper side down so we can see all the colors that we're using. Okay. And I can just keep going with this, or I can stop here, but that's it.